Hello, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to be following along with a design I found on Dribbble and trying to create this as close as possible, or maybe even just using it as inspiration with perhaps some different images alongside it. So if you're interested in getting started with CSS, this could be quite useful for you. So here is the design I'm going to be trying to recreate. So it's by this designer just here. I'll put a link to their Dribbble account in the description of this video so you can check them out. But I thought this was a good design for something that I can hopefully put together in one video, and it shows a few different techniques in terms of CSS. Now with this, I'm not going to be using any framework, just plain CSS, but in future videos I'm going to be starting to introduce frameworks like Tailwind as we go forward. But all I'm going to be doing here is using a code pen here to show where we put this together, and I'll share a link to the completed code pen at the end of the video, so I need to make sure I actually log in so I don't forget that. And I'm going to use Unsplash to actually find some images rather than the ones they have here. So let's get started straight away. So let's start by just planning out this first page just here. So we're going to have two pretend screens over here, so we'll just call them screen 1 and screen 2. So they're both going to be in section elements like this, and this one will be screen 2. But we've both given them a class of screen. So over here, we can just set out what these elements need to be. So roughly we need to work out what size we want this to be, and then we can position them so they look similar to this on the page. So let's just first give them a height of around, let's say 600 pixels and a width of 320, just to see how that looks. We'll set a grey background for now, and let's just see how that appears on the page. Let's just make sure that in our body, actually let's not put it into the body, let's make a holding element just here. We'll just put a div called hold, like that. So I'm going to try and do this quite quickly, so we can fit it all into one video. So if I make any mistakes like that, just bear with me. So we've got our hold element just here. We'll give this a display of flex so that we can use the flex box here, and we'll say justify space between, so that it positions them nicely across the page. That should, yeah, so we've got this part just here, but towards the end we'll work on actually making them have this display where one's slightly higher than the other. So that's great for now, and we can change that. But what we want to do is just set a border radius here. It looks like it's quite a lot, maybe 80 pixels. Just to mention as well, normally when you are following on with a design like this, you can actually go in and interact with it. Say it's a Figma file or a sketch file, you can actually check what these are. But because this is just an image, we have to try and do this all by eye, which makes it a little bit more complicated, and there's going to be parts we're not going to be able to get exactly, but it's a good exercise just to see how we can look at this and see what we're working with. So we're going to work on this one first. We've got this header, then this extra bit of text, then this button at the bottom here. Then we can just find an image that will fit for this, and then maybe position a boat similar on there as well. So let's first just reduce that radius. I think that's a bit too much. Let's see, yeah, that looks a bit better. So we're going to go over to our screen and put in a H1. So this is our heading. So there's our H1. So as we can see, this text comes in a little bit on either side. So it looks like first, let's go to our screen 1, and then we're going to go to the H1 in there. We're going to center the text, if I can spell, and then we want to make sure that we have this padding in on the sides here. Let's just fix the letters there. So if we inspect this, we can get an idea of where we actually are at the moment. So if we see over here, we can see that it's spanning the entire page, but we probably only want to have a width that's a bit smaller here. So if we actually put a padding on each side, so we're going to have 0 here because that's the top and the bottom, and then we're going to set a padding of about 30 pixels on the left and the right. Let's see, how does that work? Maybe a little bit more, just to push that bottom one in. So we've got an immersive travel experience. Yeah, but we'll put it a little bit smaller. Hang on. Maybe like that, and then just increase the size of the text. So we can get rid of that, go over here, and then we'll make the font size a little bit larger, probably about 26 pixels, something like that. Yeah, maybe a little bit more, 32. Yeah, there we go. And then in terms of the font, we'll look at adapting our fonts later on, but that seems like it's just about right. Maybe move it down a little bit. Like that. A bit more. Okay, so that's our first area. So now we need a little element underneath, down here. What I'm actually going to do though is put these, as we can see, we have these elements just here, and then this button down the bottom. Now we're going to use Flexbox to push these, so this one stays at the bottom and these two stay at the top. So we're going to make sure that our entire screen 1 is applied for Flexbox. So if we put these two elements at the top here, so we've got our header and then the text underneath, into a div, that will get moved as one element. So when we make the whole screen as a Flexbox, it'll push the bottom button at the bottom and that element to the top. So if I just explain what I'm doing here, so I'll put this div just here, then we'll have our, let's use an H3 here, so our line of text, like that. And then we're going to close off that div. So we have this part just here. We're going to have another div at the bottom, which where our button will be. So if we look at the minute, you can see it's appearing just here. But when we go to our screen 1, over here, and we're going to say display flex, what you'll see is it's changed things around a little bit. We want to use flex direction column, and then we'll say align items space between. Hang on, like justify content space between, like that, and that should push that to the bottom there. We also want to make sure that we are centering this line of text as well, but in terms of the way we've got that pushed to the bottom, that works quite nicely. So again, we want to focus on this area just here. So we've got a little bit of a gap there, probably about 20 pixels again. So if we go down here where we had our H1, and put in H3, we're going to first align our text to center. And then if we see here, this isn't bold and it's quite a bit smaller. So we'll put a font size of around maybe 18 pixels, font weight, normal, maybe make even that a bit smaller still, say 16. Yep. And then margin top, we want to reduce this a little bit. Maybe even take it away completely, because this H1 here will already have a margin bottom applied to it. So if we inspect that, we can see, yeah, so it's got quite a large margin bottom there. And this one doesn't have much at the top, so we can probably reduce that. So we go to our H1 and change that to 10 pixels. See if that gets what we're looking for. Does that seem about the same gap? Maybe a little bit more. 15 pixels. Okay, so then what we want to do is update that text. So start exploring beautiful places around your area today. Okay, so we've got that in there. Then we want to have show travel destinations at the bottom here. Okay, and then we have two little arrows like that. But for this, we want to probably set this as a link. It seems like that's what it is. So we'll just go like this. So we have our link down there. Let's just make sure that it's all appearing correctly. So then we're going to use our screen 1. We'll set a class on this link. We'll just call it bottom link. Now, obviously, if this was a larger file we're working with, we'd have a bit more planning in terms of the classes we're using, so we can reuse these as much as possible, which is what a framework like Tailwind really helps with. But for this example, I'm just showing you how you can do that with plain CSS. So here we have our bottom link here. We're going to align it center again. And then let's just have a look. So this is white, bold. I think that font could be this one. So what I've done there is I've set the font color, I've set the weight to be bold, and we've set it to be centered. But what we need to do actually is change the display type here to be block, because a link on its own is basically just like similar to a span, so it doesn't have its own area, but by changing it to block, it will fill that width. So we can then do something like this. We can adjust the margin bottom to move this up from the bottom of the area there a little bit. So if we see now, we have that little gap, which is starting to look okay. So now, actually, let's lift up a little bit more, maybe 35. Yeah. So what we're going to do as well is set a width onto this element just here. So that is actually smaller than this other one. So where we set the padding here, we'll use exactly the same on here, but we'll increase that by about 10 pixels, like that. So we're starting to get what we want now. But what we need to find on Unsplash is an image that has this sort of nice gradient of mountains, where we have the water here and the mountain there. So let's just start by searching like lake, mountain, or something like that. Okay, there's a few options here. None of them are exactly what we want. This one could work though. I'll scroll through a few more and then come back. Okay, so I think I found one that will work. So if we go to our screen 1 over here, we're just going to say background image URL. Let me paste in the URL. So that'll take a moment there. And then we want to say background size cover. So we can see that actually starts to fit the area that we want. But what we can actually do is adjust the position of the background. So if we adjust that like that, you can see it's starting to move a little bit. Now, what we probably would want to do is push this down a little. So rather than moving it from the side, we can push this down. So if we set that to be about the size of our page, we've got 600 pixels. We want to increase that a little bit more, so it still fills that width. Maybe like this. Okay, that seems like it's roughly what we want, but because of the size of the dimensions we're working with, it's not going to fit perfectly. So we'll just use it like that. And then we want to find a boat that we can put in here. Let's just see. Is there going to be a transparent boat? I doubt it. We might have to find one somewhere else. Probably should search for this first. Actually, we could find one that could do our background and have this what we wanted. I mean, this one does look a bit more in line with what we're looking for. Let's just try changing that. So let's see, is that any better? So if we look now, we can see this sort of fits it a bit better. So all we need to do is just update the position to be centered, and that seems to fit a bit better. Again, it's not exactly what we had in the example here, but you can see how that would fit quite nicely. Now, one thing we have here is this extra border at the bottom, and I think we could probably create a similar flow to that. But actually, let's just push this heading down a little bit from the top. Let's go to H1 and just add probably another 20 pixels there. Okay, maybe not 20. Okay, slightly less. So it's just 5. So we have this here. You'd probably want to set an overlay, and as we mentioned, it will be the fonts that will make the big difference there. But the main thing with this that I'm not quite liking is obviously the image isn't right. But if we were to zoom in a little bit here and just grab these fonts, so let's just change the fonts up here in the body. And then we can just start to work from there. So we'll reduce the size here to get that line back. Okay, so that small tweak is working a little bit there. And then what we'd probably do is have a overlay on this image here just to soften the colors there. So what you can do is do something a little bit like this. So over here where we have let's just move that across, give ourselves a little bit more room. So we have our background image. We could set a gradient here. So if we just move our URL across to here, what we'll see, if we just hide that, it's just a light gradient, but we can then tweak the actual color we have here. So if we go to effect, what we can find is we have, if we just first get rid of this one. So over here we have these colors. So if we can adjust the way of the gradient there, you can actually go to a CSS generator to get a gradient here. But all you need to do is make sure you have your gradient and then a comma here and then have your URL, and it will apply both of them on top of each other to a site like this. And then look what we have here. So we probably want to have a gradient that will go from like a green to a white at the top here, or like a light gray. So if we just try and pick a similar sort of green to that, something like this. And then over here, we want to have a transparent white color, something like this. And then if we just look and see the radius of this, so there's the gradient there. So if we take that and then copy that into our code. So here is the part of the gradient just there. In fact, all we're actually going to do is just copy the colors we have here. So we have this one over here, and we'll paste that over here. So on this first one, and then we'll just grab the second one and paste that over the second one, like that. So if we have a look now, what we can see at the minute is that you can't actually see anything, but if we adjust this now to like 0.8 or something like that, we'll start to be able to see through, which is why, you know, before it was slightly overpowering, but you can see now we have that fading display just there. We could even adjust this one to be, you know, something like that. We can get the effect coming through, but you can just tweak that slightly to get the effect that you're looking for. But you can see how that is a little bit more in line with this, but obviously without the exact styling, it's going to be quite difficult to get that. Now for this border around here, there's a few ways you could do this. I think the best way will be to have an actual block on the page, gradient as it flows down, but looking at the time we're on, I think I'll leave that for now and just move on to the next part here. Over here we have a few changes. So we have this area over here with this scrollable area on top of it. So if we go across to our code pen now and just start to put these blocks in place. So we'll go down here to our code. So looking at the way we had it before, we've got this top area just here, and then this area, and then we have this block. So we'll probably put them again as a flex box, and have this top section here with the navigation, the notification, and the name bit at the top. And then we have this block area at the bottom. So put them in first. So we've got our div in here, and then the other one at the bottom here. Just fix that like that. And in between those two, we just want to have that space. And then this first one will have the heading area. We'll actually call this a header. And then inside here, we want to have a sort of menu icon, which we'll put in as a button actually. And then on the other side of that, we have our notifications, which we're just using an emoji for now. So what we can see slowly is these elements over here. And then just underneath that, we want to have a picture and then a sort of welcome area. So that'll be just underneath this block here. So we just use a div for that. And then if we look at this, so we'd need to have inside here another div onto the side. So we've got this section here and this section here. You could probably put that straight in as an image actually. So put the image in here, and then that will span across the side. So then here we have two parts. We've got welcome back, ready for a new experience. And then underneath that, we have an H3 that has their name. So I'll put Rusty. So at the moment, you can see we have these raw elements appearing. So what I'm going to do first is just grab a example profile picture. It's just anyone that's sort of similar to this. So a simple background, ideally a square. This is probably the closest thing we can find. That's a square. And then all we need to do is just put this in here. And then we can set some styling on that as well. But for now, if we just look at this, I reckon that's about 100 pixels. So we'll just put a class name in here of profile picture. And then we'll almost be ready to start styling this out. So down here, we've got our screen 2. I'll first just put this one in so it's not taking up all that space because it's huge at the minute. And what you'll see at the minute, because it's not an exact square, we need to use object fit cover, and that adjusts it so it fits that space nicely. Now moving back from here, what we need to do is use the same adjustments we made for screen 1. So if I just push this over here, so that we can actually fit this on the page. So as you can see over here, let's just clear out the CSS we're not using. We have this part, so we want this all to be in screen 2 as well. So what that will do is it will push the block underneath, but we haven't actually got anything there yet. So if we see here, this is our part down here that's just underneath that top part. So we're going to give these names. So we're going to call this heading, and then welcome text. Then underneath, so from this div just here, we're going to call this it's this block here. So we'll just sort of call it maybe just write in recommended trips for now. So, okay, now that we have this, you can see how it's pushed it to the bottom again. And what we need to do now is actually adjust these a little bit. So where we have our screen 2, we need to go into the heading part. So see we have our heading, and then adjust this here. So we're going to say heading. Again, it'll be display of flex. And we want this to fill the entire width of the page. So we'll use justify content. Just copy it here. Space between, so that should now fit all the way across. Now again, we'll go in and actually add padding on these to make sure that they're not right in the corners here. But we can see how that is appearing now. And then for this next part, we need to do exactly the same thing. So what we can actually do is apply that styling onto here as well. Like that. And that'll then push them across. And again, now we can go in to actually adjust that styling a little bit more. So we want to make this even smaller. I think I got that a bit wrong there. And then add some margins on each side. So if we were to say padding 20 pixels, that might be enough. Maybe slightly less. Move it down a little bit. Okay, maybe a little bit more. Okay, so now what we want to do is go to our profile picture, add a border radius of about 10 pixels. And then as we said, we want to reduce the size of this a little bit more. Add a margin at the side. So we'll probably add that from the text. So over here we have our welcome text, and then we have this area as well. So what we'll do here is call it text. So we've got welcome text, text, which just gives us a way we can get in to style this. Now this, we want to span a little bit more of the page. So we're going to set a margin on the left just to make a bit more space between these two elements. And if we actually look at it, we can see that the top part here, yeah, the margins are pushing that down, which we don't want. We want to remove all those margins. So we'll just go into here and grab both of these. So it'll be H4 and H3. Just remove the margins completely, but don't worry, it's not going to look like that. Because as you can see, we want these to be centered in this area. So if we go back over here, what we can do is center it. So like that, and it now should appear alongside each other. Like that. But if we wanted to center it, we could switch it to center and just add some margins there to push it away. Okay, so next we need to start working on this area just here. It's a little bit more complicated than I thought without actually being able to interact with this. So what we have here then is a scrollable part of the page that has these different blocks. So we're just going to go into here now and make some space. So this is our heading, let's use an H3. And then we want to have these blocks. So they start with a padding there, which looks like it's on the whole element. So we'll do this first one, which is a bit larger. So we've got our scroll trips just in here. So here we're going to have our trips. Now these have an image and then a tag at the top and a tag at the bottom. So what we're going to do first is just find a couple of pictures we can use. So we've got a mountain here. We'll grab that image and we'll set that in here. Like that. And then the rest of it we'll actually put in here. So we'll do another one of these actually. Just make sure we've got the right amount of elements here. So inside here, we need to have a tag up here and then 2 tags down here. So as we saw before, we're going to push these at the side. So we'll probably have a row along the top and a row along the bottom. So that'll be 2 divs inside here. Probably don't need to use divs all the time, but for speed, I'm just jumping straight to them. So inside here, we'll just put a span that says top rated. Like that. And then down here we have 2 elements, so we have the title and then the location. So put this first one in a span as well. Like that. And then underneath it we have the location. So we'll just use another span, but we'll just put different styles on them. So this one here we'll put location, this one here we'll put name, and this one we'll put tag. Okay, so that should be all the parts we need for this. So if we look back over here, we can now put in a second one and we can get to this part afterwards. So first we're going to tidy this up a little bit. So we have our actual box here, which is quite a bit larger than the other part of the page. So if we go to our recommended trips, so we'll put this rec trips, and we want to make sure that this is actually, relative to the other parts of the page, a fair bit larger. This is screen 2, recommended trips. And I'd say that's about 70% height-wise over here. So that's what we'll start with that. Height 70%. Let's see. Yeah, it seems like it's something like that. We want to have a rounded part here. So actually we'll use the same radius we have at the very, very top of our screens. Like that. Okay, and then we want to make sure that we are having a bit of padding in here. So we probably want to have half the amount of padding that we have width. So let's see. Yeah, something like that. At the minute, I'm just going to put a 1 pixel border around just so we can see where this is going. So 1 pixel solid. Okay, so that's the area we're working with. So if we look over here, we have these parts. We want to make sure that this is overflowing into a scroll area. So at the moment where we have these blocks, we have our scroll trips. We want to set this to overflow. So if we just make sure we're on screen 2. So we have X and Y, so that's horizontal. We want that to overflow there. And then over here on the actual items, we're going to set a thing here called class trip box, something like that. So if we copy this whole element, if I go back here, so we'll find the whole element, which is this one. We're just going to copy that once. So we should now have two. Yep. So we'll adjust that in a minute so that it goes across. Let's just see what the next one is. So we'll just change that to Italy. Okay. And we can adjust that in a minute so that will scroll. But you can see as it's starting to slowly take shape, but obviously there's a few things that are quite different just purely because of the fonts and the exact colors here and the images. But as this would adapt, you can see how this would start to take shape. Now I'm just checking how long we've been recording. This is quite long, so I'll probably have to record a second part that's going to finish this off and go into more detail on how we would actually, tidy these parts up and get the right fonts in. So the next part will be focusing on finishing off these trips, making so we can scroll through these, and then adding in the right colors. I'll start getting out a color picker and really look for the fonts that we want here. But this is a quick introduction on how you can start styling just with pure vanilla CSS. And then later on, I'm going to look into actually adjusting this with Tailwind to show the difference in those approaches. But if you're first getting started with CSS, I'd recommend definitely starting by writing out yourself, just so you can get an idea of what is actually behind the frameworks and how CSS works. Especially for things, if you come into bugs or issues, you need to have a better understanding of how CSS works. The hierarchy, things like the Z index of where things are on the page, positioning, all these different parts, which you won't get if you're only using a framework. Welcome back. So rather than recording a separate video, I thought I'd go ahead and finish work on this. It's a couple of days later now, but I've gone ahead and actually finished off this design that we're working on. So when we last left off, we had this just here. So we were working closely to try and get to this design, and we'd started by outlining the different elements and parts of the page that we needed to create before going ahead and getting the color picker, and as much as we can do without having the actual source file that we can really interact with to get the right sizes, fonts and elements. So I've been using this color picker extension over here that helps you really grab the colors on the page so you can get as close to this as possible without, like I say, having the full information available. So this is what I've managed to get together so far. If I just close that. So this is the finished version that I've been working on at the moment. So as you can see here, we've got this font, which is the Georgia font. Down here, we're using Poppins as our secondary font. You can see this area down the bottom here isn't actually a border. It's a rounded rectangle that just applies to the bottom part of this element down here to give this rounded border effect with opacity here. Moving across to the other side, we've reduced the overlay here to sort of not saturate this background image as much. On this second screen, as you can see at the top here, I really like this mobile menu, which is just a simple div here with 3 spans of different widths, and they all have the same background color, but we've just reduced the opacity of the top and the bottom one there slightly, and just aligned one of them to the left and the right, and have the middle one span the whole width. These fonts here are also Georgia. We used this color. We used the color picker here to get this font color, which I think makes a big difference for this text element over here. We increased the border radius of this image. I went on Google just to find some sort of mountain outline image that's a little bit similar to what they have. I definitely prefer the one they have here, but I couldn't find anything close to that available. But this one here is just, it's this image just here. So if I just open it fully, this is what we're working from. So I just inverted these colors. It's a transparent background, and then just adjust the size to fit this in here, and just used relative positioning to move it slightly further down. So you get the feeling that it's sort of part of the page. And then in this area here, we have Poppins again for this heading. And then these blocks which scroll across. So the way we got this to scroll is by having an extra element here. So if I move this down, you can see we have our scroll element here, which is just set to width of 100%, and this is to overflow any content that's outside of that container. So if there's anything more than 100%, that'll be scrolled. So what we have instead is this trip hold class in here, which actually contains all of our trip boxes underneath that, and that's set to width max content. So that's the equivalent CSS property is going in with JavaScript or something and calculating the width of everything inside of that box, and then that's that property. So not all browsers support max content yet, so if you want to use that, I'd definitely recommend going to can I use or something like that, and looking for max content. And here you go, you can find out which browsers support it. So these days it's quite well supported, but again, I'd recommend just going in, checking that before you use that in projects you might be using. As I say, an alternative to that is using like JavaScript or something to calculate the inner width of the elements inside that area. But then inside these boxes, we just have some simple styling in here. I'm not 100% happy with how I put this together because we're using absolute positioning for the elements inside here. So we have this one here, for example, to be up in the top right corner. Where is it? Yeah, just here. I'd probably change that to use the flex box and just have these two blocks here. So we have this top block and this bottom one here with these two elements, to use sort of space between there, and then have one aligned flex end, these two flex start, which could have worked as well, but I just sort of rushed that a little bit. So you can see how that fits in. We have an overlay. Actually, I'll first start by explaining this one, but we have an overlay over here, just so you can read that. But as I mentioned, yeah, this part over here, if I show that first, I'll put the links in the description to all of these, the first part and the second part, so you can actually compare the two and see if you can get this second part finished as well without actually, start with part one and see how close you can get to part two. That'd be a good exercise to try. But I'll put links to all of the code in the description. But as you can see, we have this before element just here. So when you're using these pseudo classes, you need to first make sure you have this content attribute set here, because if you don't have that set, this element just sort of doesn't get added onto the page. And then the main thing here to look at is the background image, which is just a gradient that goes from white to transparent, and then that's faded in. So you can see we have an opacity set on that as well. If I take that off, you can see how it has that, it's a bit too saturated for the background image. And then the border radius is the same as the radius around the whole screen element we have here. We use width, and then we use this calc setting just here, which is really useful when you're working with percentages. So we want to make sure that we're taking off 12 pixels from the left and from the right. So rather than calculating what that is, this helps keep it responsive, because we know if that's going to be our border effect that we want, we need to make sure that we take it off both sides. So if we double that and then take it off the percentage, it's always going to be there no matter what if we change the overall width of the page, that percentage is going to stay the same. And that's pretty much it for this side over here. Again, we adjust the colors of these fonts. So you can see this one here, if that wasn't the same, doesn't quite fit. And then this one as well is a slightly customized font color just to fit in with this. So we use the color picker for that on here. And then over here, if I just click onto these, you can see we have these three spans, as we mentioned. And then over here, just finally I'll just show you this part. We're using another pseudo class, this time after. There's before and after you can use here. They're both basically the same. So we use content, absolute, to get that positioning. When you're using absolute though, make sure that the parent class you're applying it to has position relative. Otherwise you're sort of gonna bleed outside of that area. So if I untick that, you can see it's gone over the whole page. Or if I tick it, it's going to be applied just to that one element, which is something to look for. And as I mentioned earlier, we're not using any CSS frameworks here. So it's a way for you to sort of use CSS on its own and get to really understand the different properties here. So I definitely recommend trying out this exercise as well. Find something on Dribbble that you like the look of. You could even use this one as well. This design I really like, and you can find more information about this designer here. I'll put a link in the description. You can even hire them if you're if you really like their work and you want to work with them as well. And they've got other designs on here, or there's more designs on Dribbble as well. But if you've got any questions on how to do this, or if you get stuck on anything, just let me know, and I'll be happy to see if I can help. But otherwise, that is it for this video here. So we've taken this picture without any other information, so we couldn't really inspect the fonts, we couldn't get the colors without using the color picker, we couldn't even find out the sizing really without getting another extension to do that. So it's just using your eye, seeing what you think there, what are the elements, how can you make these appear on the page. And then part one, we did this, we managed to grab those elements, put them there. And then the second part was more about these finer details, adjusting things, tweaking the font sizes, and you can see how big these changes are, which are just few small subtle changes. So I definitely recommend trying this out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.